to forge the narrative.
Hey everybody, welcome to Forge the Narrative. My name is Paul, your host. We all about Lost Souls podcast. I'm joined by a special crew tonight. I got Red Powell.
Hello.
Yo man, welcome back.
Thanks.
And Archon Scary.
The Dark Kin has returned.
So guys, I got you on because the ITC has released some updated missions. You guys, we've talked about you in the past of playing unconventional lists that attack the meta, good at scoring objectives. I wanted to know what y'all thought about these things.
By these things, we're talking the new, ITC stuff, really, which is kind of how most of the known world plays 40k nowadays competitively.
Let me jump in for 1 second. Sorry, Red, but I want to preface this by it is a really recognized tournament format. If that's not what you like or not what you want to play, then don't do that. Go your own way or use the whatever missions that the people in your area like. What I do like about these missions, though, is that there are certain core concepts of the game that these fold in to be competitive, and these most recent changes are right in line with what I believe to be positive for competitive play, which, in my opinion, you guys tell me where I'm wrong, start to help balance things out. Now, Red, sorry, I jumped in there with an opinion, a hot take, but you've been playing with some of these missions recently, and, I don't know if we really got super deep into your list design philosophy of it last time you were on, other than talking about, the crazy spot on corn list, but I like your approach. Can you tell me what your experience has been?
First of all, the ITC, to build on what you were talking about, Paul, is that, so it is technically house rules, however you want to say it, but it really is, and Scary was saying it is the widely accepted. I mean, it is definitely the competitive play on the most broadest sense. I mean, there's lots of formats out there that I know we all love and enjoy to their own different aspects, but this is probably, for the most part, anywhere I go, you can relate to a degree with ITC across the board. And so with that, we've all kind of gone into it over the last year and a little bit more than that, and then some, right, with the, primary missions have been kill one, kill more, hold one, hold more, and then the secondaries have been kind of the more fluctuating degree. And so, you've had to have an army to a degree that needs to, someone gives you a list, and Scar, I've seen a lot of your services as far as coaching and things that you've talked about, and in regards of, can you hold one, hold more? Can you kill one, kill more? Like, can you feasibly do that with this army over time, given the different range of the meta? And so for me, I have actively seeked out some of the more, what some in some degrees might say are some of the more difficult lists to wield, I guess. Some might say they're disadvantaged. I won't go that far, but between Necrons and pure Khorne, they're not exactly, they don't have all the tools necessarily readily available to them. Khorne being chaos, but having no psyker powers, and then of course, Necrons don't have psyker powers either. But at the same time, they've got some advantages. It's just, can you capitalize on those given the mission sets? And so that kind of goes into it with preparing for any format, right? Is recognizing what you need to accomplish with the tools that you have available. And so for myself, we'll look at, I'll talk more on the Khorne aspect here. Like, I understand I have to get into melee with something, with whatever I'm going to use. Whether it's Bloodthirsters or Khorne Berserkers or Disco Lords or what have you, I've got to get into melee. And so how am I going to do that, and what am I going to accomplish with the mission? So moving into the new ITC stuff, I got to say, and I agree, Paul, that in regards of the balance, I do think that the team behind the ITC missions is definitely trying to seek a balance that is, and what I hope with the continued development, especially with the data and this beta period that we're going through right now, I hope that the data continues to feed into that balancing focus. Because the new stuff, man, I tell you what, the new stuff, and I'll take a breath here in a second, but, the new stuff is with this attacker defender, which we saw introduced more so definitively with chapter approved. I mean, so the way it starts, big change, right? For anybody that hasn't tried it yet, you roll off, and right from the get-go, whoever wins the roll-off determines if they are the attacker or defender. If you choose that you are the attacker, then the defender then gets to roll for deployment type. If they don't like it, they can re-roll, but they have to take the second option. And then they choose their deployment zone after the deployment type has been determined. and then objectives get put out in certain missions. You follow the mission-specific instructions, and then the attacker gets to fully deploy their army. There's no more alternating. There's no more, even missions versus odd missions. It's every mission, the attacker deploys their entire army, then the defender deploys their entire army, and then whoever the attacker is goes first. And I think that there is some significant strengths and weaknesses to approaching, depending on if you want to be the attacker or defender and how you go about it. And it's a pretty big deal. And I will take a breath on that note.
Well, you certainly you play challenging lists, either from a design perspective or just a faction focused perspective, which, Scar, have you had a chance to look over the new changes and what are your thoughts?
Yeah, I have. As soon as they came out, actually, I filmed, I think, a couple of battle reports playing with the new rules. I do want to say that regardless of whether you agree or not with the rules, first of all, it's really cool, or like with the mission format, it's really nice to know that there's change and there's movement and that there's feedback being taken into account. Even all the work that's been going in this year, mainly on like the statistics of the game, which is one of the first times in like Wargaming 40k history that we have a resource that has been collecting data, as you were saying, Red, over a large period of time, and then that data can actually be put into practice when trying to like determine parameters to say, change the mission format or to create more balance or things like that. When, one of the things that we do not have, that we can't do as a community is, we can give feedback to Games Workshop in terms of the game. We can errata stuff or, ban stuff if we want to, whatever. But at the end of the day, we can't really affect gameplay much more than sort of setting the parameters of how we play the game and in mission format. And I like the missions that we got. I like the changes. I like the direction that this beta sort of set is going. The change to, attacker defender is fantastic. That change alone, like you said, it's a change, winner decides who's attacker and who's defender. To be honest, even a simple change like that, I like simply for the fact that you're not trying to lose the first roll of the game.
A bit of a psychological thing. Like, did I win here? I rolled a 5. I felt like I should be doing something.
Right. Because a lot of the times, especially on those, you deploy, I deploy in the alt bait, the main format was if you lost the roll, you chose to either deploy first, go first, or get your opponent to deploy first, go first. So it was like a very counterintuitive, and it might seem like a small thing to some of you, but for me, it just never felt right. First roll of the game, I'm trying to roll crappy. Like what kind of like hack job am I trying to do here? But in terms of the missions, the secondaries have changed, the primaries have seen some change. The way bonus points and some of the missions have changed as well. And all in all, I like the direction the format is going in the sense that it seems to open the door for a lot of subtle changes. Just a simple change like gangbusters not affecting troop units that are multiple wounds, essentially. All of a sudden, the breachers from AdMech become a lot more feasible as a list.
The way to balance the game, I've always thought this. I mean, going back all the way to the 6th edition where, we designed a mission set and took feedback in from players. I mean, that's one of those things. The way you balance the game, when you have no power over the actual game itself is through what the objectives, what the win conditions are, what that path to victory is. This, and the point of also about collection of data, like that didn't happen by accident. We have a resource as competitive players in the form of 40kstats.com and other people, putting their list, entering the list, participating in the things like Down Under pairings and Best Coast pairings. People participating with that kind of stuff, which gives us data collection to then be able to really take in objective feedback. What we had, in previous things was anecdotal and very much subjective. Now we get to craft that stuff into, usable objects. And thankfully, the tournament scene is as large as it is, which if you're on the fence about getting out there, I highly suggest it. Find one that you can go to that, if you're unsure what it's going to be like, find one that's easy for you to get to. I bet you there's one that's not too far away, and go. Then we get to, and that brings us to where we are now. Everybody out there, everybody communicating about what works for them, what doesn't work for them. Now we come to these updates to the missions, which are based in my opinion, actual facts.
It is. It is awesome. And to what you're saying, Paul, in regards of what Down Under Pairings, BCP, and the ITC battle apps, and what all of these things are able to collate. To be fair, I mean, so I've played now eight games of the new ITC deal. I'm sure, and Scary, I've seen some of your stuff, and it kind of played into some of the like you said, Paul, anecdotal, biases that you might build or what have you going into it. And out of my 8 games now, I've had 5 where I've gone first. And of course, I am playing a different kind of list, right? I am playing, I admit I've kind of broken my chains on, I seized the Skull Throne. I now see fit to take a greater part out of Chaos.
You put Psychers in your list, didn't you?
I'm telling you right now, man, it's this weird trick. I don't know if you guys have heard of it, but it's called Warp Time.
Warp Time.
It's a pretty remarkable thing.
I think Korn would appreciate getting into combat faster.
Oh my goodness. I tell you what, so I was running just this last weekend at a local RTT at an awesome little local game store. I was running 3 large squads of Khorne Berserkers, World Eaters, that I was infiltrating, or I was scout moving up the board. And I went first in all of my games, and so I was able to push everything up. I also had Nurglings, right? So I was also forward deploying them. And so I was able to hold and seize the ground, and I'll talk more about the secondaries in a little bit, but I was able to, with Warp Time, also ensure that I got that one crucial squad of Berserkers in, which is really, they're just, with the new Faith and Fury Psychic Awakening stratagems, they're just super juiced. And
47 attacks apiece.
Oh man, so you're talking 16 guys, five attacks apiece, 6 on the sergeant. Fighting twice, they reduce 1 when they go down in the second round, but it's, on top of, I'm doing Death to the False Emperor, I'm increasing the number of attacks, my AP's up, it's just silly. I've also got crazy things like Prescience and all these other things I haven't touched in, multiple years now, and, it's just, so being able to do that and seize that, there is definitely, what you were saying, Scary, in regards to being able to choose if you want to go with attacker or defender, and if where your army has that advantage and you can kind of play into that. The only point that, and I totally get it, I acknowledge the communal or community drawback on it, is that as a student of wargaming for myself, and not saying that people have to share my opinion by any means in this regard, I don't know if I necessarily agree with the removal of C's just yet. I acknowledge that C's is 16%, there's 16% chance it's going to happen. I don't think that anybody should be able to go into a war game scenario and accept the fact of an absolute, if that makes sense. Now, don't get me wrong, every model, every war game is inherently incorrect. It's just what you want to abstractify, right? And what goes into the game. And so I totally acknowledge the other side of the argument in regards of removing C's. It is just my opinion. I think that C's adds enough of an element to keep people honest in deployment that you can't just, when I knew that I had the attack and I was going to go first and I could just put everything out there, there's a degree of confidence that you can exude in how you're going to get it out there and what you're going to put out to do it. That doesn't mean that I didn't have a chance of failure, but I know I would have deployed much differently if I knew that there was a chance that someone was going to seize on.
Even the remotest possibility, you would
correct.
You would deploy differently, yeah.
Well, I think against, on that term, in terms of the C's, it's definitely going to, I feel, it will be one of the more polarizing aspects of the ITC format, in the sense that, not being able to see, some people love the ability to have a chance to go first if they were in a rough situation where they're like, hey, this is a really bad matchup for me, and the table is really light on terrain, but if I seize, I can win, so,
people love rolling 6s. I've had people give me the first turn and then roll to seize on me and make it. People just love it sometimes.
What it's going to do, I feel, is it'll be the people who like the seize, will be disappointed. the people who hate the seas will not be disappointed. Sure. And the people in between that don't care will stop wondering whether or not they will seize or will be seized on. So that'll be one of two things. Number one, going first, you know you're going first, great, so you plan to go first. But if you're going second, you know you're going second, so you don't get yourself out of position to try and seize. There's no random sort of psychological thing that's telling you in your back of your head, what if you seize? Right? You're just gonna play to go second, which I feel would be beneficial for some people who just don't have restraint in that sense and would have tried to play for the seas when, plan roll sixes is never really the proper plan to go for when you're playing at a tournament.
Don't crush my dreams.
And so in some military circles or whatever you want to call it, we have this thing called the cult of the offensive, right? And to a point, the elements, the fundamentals of the offense are surprise, audacity, concentration, and tempo. And so it should always be someone wanting to almost, in the sense or the approach to this, someone should always be concerned about that, exactly what you're talking about, that initiative, right? Is this the time for me to go on the initiative and seize the offensive kind of deal? And I understand if we go back into this being a game and whatnot, I get it. You roll it back and if you want it to become a more clinical process in certain regards, I can totally acknowledge it. I think you're 100% right in regards to the people that, are indifferent one way or the other. It's not as big of a deal. For myself, the game is such a big aspect that I enjoy that honestly, I will adapt and overcome my personal inclinations and take advantage of what needs to be taken advantage of. But I do think that the seas was an element that kind of kept it in this more...
Kept you honest on the tabletop.
Kept a player honest, but at the same time, that same psychological thing, which I think is a great thing to talk about. I think that a player that can execute tactical patience is... That's a real skill, right? And it's definitely something to be taught and endured through sometimes very hard lessons.
Yeah, I like that. I like
trying to deploy to seize and then not seize, or going all out and then getting seized on only to have overextended your capacity.
That's right. People lose real tactical scenarios doing that all the time.
Well, let us know, I guess. Send us emails and tell us, hey, we like the seas, we don't like the seas, right?
Well, I think we'll find most people are actually indifferent. I mean, it's a part of the game, and it's kind of fun when it happens, but it's not fun when it happens to you, and I think most people objectively realize that.
Sure.
So maybe so. We haven't really, we've skipped over an important step here. So now in the pregame phase of the round, the secondaries are broken up into two different categories. We've got the maneuver category and then the seek and destroy category for the secondaries. You have to pick one from each of those, and then your third one can be from either category or the old school.
I love this, by the way. I want to say, as a Drukhari player who loves maneuvering around the board, first of all, some of these maneuver secondaries are phenomenal. I love the concept of being able to double down on some of these secondaries. And a lot of secondaries have a way to sort of get maxed out a lot faster than they were before, by either committing more units to basically trying to get your secondary, which in this case means, you can get 2 points per recon in a turn. Now they did change it so you can't get the 2 points on the first turn, so you can't commit turn 1 to start getting all your secondaries by turn 2. But I love the ability to max out my recon in 3 turns, is there instead of having to do it every turn for 4 turns.
That is interesting. Recon is one of the ones that I'll often pick myself because it's something you can control. You could actively be working towards that. And then to close it out in 3 turns potentially opens me up to more interaction in the game, and that's not terrible.
It's not terrible at all. And, there's also some subtle changes to things like King of the Hill, which is now end of player turn, or behind enemy lines, which is end of player turn, which, means that you can get yourself into position to get recon for a couple of turns and then move your way into getting enemy lines with different units. Forcing shooty armies to have to take some sort of board control secondary also means that, they're going to have to, people are going to have to build that sort of element into the list. How am I going to get that king of the hill. How I have to interact more with the game and not just sit in my corner.
Engineers exist. I'm not a fan of engineers, but it exists.
Engineers do exist. It's always risky, of course. But if you plan to, always take engineers, and then you run into that, other list that has the killing engineers units.
Red piling over there with 47 berserkers.
Right. Oh, anything like that. It's risky. Although, as with engineers, there's an ability to get 2 engineer points in a turn, which means that now, you can, if you want to be aggressive with engineers and kind of try and max it out sooner in the game, it allows those units you've sort of earmarked to get those points to potentially be a part of the game later in the game instead of just having to sit there all game and basically do nothing.
Yeah, and if I can expound on why I'm not a fan of engineers is because of that interaction sponge, essentially. You have to commit to not doing something. And in a game where we're trying to make the most of our toys, I like to always be doing something. That's my style, right? So, I understand why I'm not a fan of that. That doesn't mean it shouldn't exist.
Makes sense.
I think that's a great point, Paul. And that's, again, I go back into I'm not going to hit the dead horse on C's anymore, but in regards of tactical objectives and things that maybe we don't want to do, but sometimes we have to do because we know it's for the better accomplishment of it or what have you, in regards of take like engineers, right? So my list at LVO this last year, I had Chaos Space Marines for my Red Corsair Battalion that for the most part just kind of chilled out. And they're not bad candidates for things like engineers, right? And so it's, I would love for them to be more useful, but to a certain extent, that also provides me an avenue to make some more use out of them, in certain degrees. Of course, when 45% of the field comes with Thunderfire cannons, it kind of makes it a bit difficult. But the point being, I 100% agree in regards of what I really like, and Scar, you were hitting on it in regards of being able to double tap some of these objectives and then kind of move on to the other part of the game, is that there does feel to be a more dynamic element by being able to double tap, achieve the objective, and move into whatever other extent that you need to, so that you're not stuck, and this is, I don't have the data in front of me or what have you, but when we talk about game turns and how much time it takes to accomplish a game or what have you, and you say you get into the 4th, 5th, or 6th turn, and you've spent X amount of turns just trying to accomplish something, you can tell, in all of our, Paul, whether it's your Eldar or Scar, your Dark Eldar, or my Chaos, or what have you, you can kind of tell what people are going to use to try and accomplish some of these maneuver objectives. And so it does shift some priority across the game in regards of what some of these units are capable of doing, depending on what your opponent picks. I think it's a really good dynamic that they played into, and it kind of feels like they almost were able to accomplish, with the speed at which these objectives are accomplished, you almost achieve a Maelstrom-like end state without having to introduce the cards.
Makes sense.
That's interesting.
And something else that I'd like to say is we live in an era where 40k armies in general and playing the game are a lot more brutal and a lot more killy in that sense. So a lot of the times your forces get severely depleted towards the mid to end of the game, especially if you've been actively participating trying to get points. So it's nice to have the option to try and max out a lot of these secondaries, or at least fight for them a lot more aggressively early in the game, while you still have most of your army to do it with, and then sort of play a more tactical strategic game towards the end of the game when it becomes more, kill more, hold more bonus, while you're trying to sort of outmaneuver and outpace your opponent.
I like that opinion, and I can see it too. And I haven't thought about that just yet, but being able to compete for those points. In the early rounds for the average player. That's kind of what, I build my list for whatever mission format I'm going into. That's what everyone should do. Whatever, people sometimes get a little, the side eye for bringing a beardy list or a list that's too optimized. You should always be optimizing your list for whatever engagement you're going into. But that is not what a lot of people get their jollies on. They just want to do the best with what they want to play with. And I think this opens up the door a little bit more for that.
Yes.
Yeah. And I think, to that's a great point in regards of, people being able to opening this up and making it more accessible in regards of some armies being able to score up front. You're going to see a little bit more of, and I mean, this is a prediction. I look very, very forward to seeing the data as it comes out and how it plays into it in regards of, does this fluctuate the scores in such a way that, I mean, who enjoys playing we all want to win, right? Like that's something that people can agree upon.
You want to empathize with your preference to win.
Right. Well, and so, the same thing when you talk about like removing Cs, right? Like what's the real reason behind removing Cs? That's something else entirely, but it's still someone like, Cs creates an element of that is better off not dealing with. At the same time in the game, it is still a game that we're all trying to have fun with. And if you can score a little bit more, it's much better than walking away from a game. And I know we've all had them. At least I have. I'll take that one. That where you walk away with 4 points, right? Where you didn't feel like you were able to accomplish something up front or what have you.
That is the worst when when we're looking at our friends' scores. They're like, how on earth did you not get at least 10 points here? Like what?
Right.
What happened?
I think now that's a lot more plausible, right? In a lot of ways, I do think that, and again, just a prediction. I look forward to seeing the data on it, but I do think people are going to score a little bit more up front with some of the flexibility that's been added into the secondaries.
That's nice.
Yeah, some of the secondaries have been tweaked and, to sort of incorporate different unit styles or sort of help list builds. I had touched on the breachers before, but, being able to, gangbusters not being used on troops, for example, or marked for death, only affecting point level instead of power level, because, power level's sort of like a dynamic that isn't really tweaked by GW in the sense that they haven't really touched power levels like at all in any like iteration other than like some of the new stuff. So things that like Titan Slayer and Gangbusters sort of like being paired up into one secondary, or the ability for Titans to take King of the Hill, because you want your knight to run into the middle of the table and be like, get me off the middle of the table or I'm going to get my secondary points. So I think there's a lot of just fun intricacies.
I think you're talking about Big Game Hunter combined.
So Big Game Hunter combined, and then King of the Hill was something that was switched so that at least right now in the beta has been switched to allow Titanic units to score King of the Hill as well, which allows you to sort of run your knights into the middle of the table and get secondary points for a maneuver objective when some of the maneuver objectives are almost nigh impossible for knights to get.
Sure. And I think that's great. I do think kind of balancing some of those aspects out, especially given the, the ITC factions and how they're based. Being a player that, has played some of the, less popular factions and whatnot, like I do think that balancing some of this really does help. Given what was done for Knights is a great consideration given to some of the community. I think that been discussed that, allowing Knights to have that advantage, putting them more on the table might help balance some of what the greater community perceives as the issues with the meta as it is now with Space Marines, right? I do think that Marines and Knights, have some answers for some of the Space Marines out there right now that if they have the ability to score better due to the mission construction, just in the straight killing part, they can start to make up for that in certain degrees.
I feel that in the game itself, if you want to play with your army, you should never be discouraged from playing with the army that you love to play just because the format makes it harder for you to play your lists.
Depends on what your goals are, right? Though, if your goal is to win, at a tournament, by the way, if your goal is to win more games than you lose or come away with a podium placement or whatever, sometimes you have to take certain things.
Correct, and you have to be understanding. That's a whole other topic, Paul. As in, understanding your goals specifically when you're going into an event, and are you willing to sort of sacrifice what you perceive to be fun or whatever in order to win, right? In terms of secondary missions and the objectives, yes, being able to have more options within your said list to score the missions at hand, I think is good.
Yeah, to feel like you got a puncher's chance.
Exactly.
Of getting in there.
Yes.
Also, by the way, if we were to say which is your favorite new, there's a question to the panel, but which is your favorite one that they've sort of tweaked? I want to say Born for Greatness is one of my favorites.
Oh, you totally stole my answer.
Okay, if you're in agreement, I'm going to say it's because I can have my heroic Archon running around the table and murdering everything in sight and getting me points, and it is absolutely hilariously amazing.
So Born for Greatness, for those that may have not checked it out yet, is the new secondary in the Seek and Destroy one. Pick one of your single model character units. The unit gains 1 point for accomplishing each of the following objectives up to a total of 4 points each. Each objective can only be achieved once per game. So let me read that over again one more time for clarity. Pick Mephiston to go around and score a bunch of points for you.
I love it. Absolutely love it.
Destroyed enemy unit that does not have the character keyword. Destroyed enemy unit that has the character keyword. Denied an enemy psychic power. Hold an objective outside your deployment zone. Heroically intervene into an enemy unit. Begin and end a battle round wholly within your opponent's deployment zone. Red, you have a favorite.
Yeah, well, first, I do love, and I know, like, some people haven't talked about it as much from some of the feedback and whatnot. I think that's just because people are still figuring it out, right? Figuring out the right way to attack that specific secondary, which I, too, love as I have and World Eaters kind of plays into it. If you see, like, Karn, his warlord trait is every time he kills a character or a monster, he gets +1 attack, +1 strength. And so to just focus like him in a Smash Lord or something like that into one of those kinds of characters that's just flying around trying to accomplish those objectives is a lot of fun. But no, honestly, my favorite, and I haven't gotten to play with it enough to try it out, but I really love the concept, is Sappers. I don't know if you guys have looked at that one in depth. But so, if you don't mind, I'll read it.
Yeah, go ahead. Or at least summarize.
So it's pick 2 units, kind of like engineers, right? Non-character, non-fortification, non-flyer. So as long as they end within 3 inches of an objective outside of my deployment zone. So these are my sappers outside of my deployment zone. They render that objective unscorable if the unit didn't act, right? An objective that's rendered unscorable cannot generate any mission points for primary or secondary objectives for the sapper unit's opponent. So my opponent cannot essentially score off those objectives. And so they can't benefit, same kind of deal like engineers and whatnot. And then they, for each objective rendered unscorable, earn 1 point at the end of your turn. Starting turn 2 and on, you can earn up to a maximum of 2 points. So just like what you were saying, Scar, in regards to what the new recent adjustment, that the first turn you can only score 1 point, but in the next turn you can score up 2 points. And thereafter. I love the fact that you render those objectives unscorable. And so to a point, this is for some of those armies. So again, I go back to my useless Chaos Space Marines that are often chilling in the back, or I can move them forward or what have you. But for some people, when you think about some of these other armies, take like Custodes, for example, right? Like some of those Custode Guard troops, and I'm not saying, this is the most optimized suggestion or whatnot, but I've just been trying to toy around with exactly what you can send out there that's going to suddenly render an objective unscorable for your opponent, that then they've got to get rid of that unit to make it unscorable.
Yeah. And there's a thing in here, too. You can't really protect that with stratagems that would make them untargetable.
Correct.
So that's an interesting thing to be sprinkled in here.
I think taking Sappers and going second has a huge potential as well, as it denies primary objective points. It also gives a unit an opportunity to sort of deny scoring potential for an enemy without having to kill an enemy unit. So not only do you gain a point for sapping it, but then you'd potentially take an objective away for hold more, for example.
Oh, it could be a 2-point, 3-point swing.
Yeah. It could. And especially if you're so let's say it's like again, going back to Custodes, and you take the newer jump troops that they introduced just in the last, several months or so, all of Custodes is objective scoring, right? And so all you got to do is move these guys into within vicinity of the objective, and they score it, and then it doesn't score for the other person. They automatically take that precedence over the objective secured kind of ruling.
Oh, neat. Okay, hadn't thought about that.
And I might not be on the most, again, optimal path of what I was thinking, but in that regard, there's just some very interesting things that I think could continue to play into it. And even then, you consider some of these horde armies and what have you, or even the lesser things, things like for Necrons, Scarabs, to a certain extent. Those things, they move pretty quick. They can get around, and they're not going to do a lot, but they can definitely sit next to an objective and sap it. And so there's just a lot of little things here that I think can really, that the field has the opportunity to take advantage of.
I think it'll reward players who just think outside of the box a little bit. Instead of just going, well, I need to move this unit within, this objective and get a point. There's a lot more to it. The tactical implications of denying it to your opponent and, at what point you do it and things like that, or combining it with something else. I was thinking of something like ground control, where you could potentially make 2 objectives in a 4 objective mission unscorable at the end of the game, and therefore score the 2 other objectives on the table and count as having all the objectives for your 4 ground control points.
Can a spore mine be a sapper?
Yeah, only until somebody gets too close to it and it
you fire them out.
Involuntarily explodes.
I don't think you can select them at the beginning of the game. I'm gonna say no. But what you guys are talking about though is I don't think you want to roll up to a table and just haphazardly pick sappers as your
Correct.
thing. I think you want to have units in your army, and you're talking about recognizing what would be potentially shelved units at the moment that could have a function for something like this.
Yes, exactly. You're definitely going to have a game plan, and that's we go back to the setup of the secondaries and the fact that you have to choose a maneuver and you have to choose it's spacing on me the title.
The seek and destroy and then a maneuver secondary.
Yes, and so the fact that you have to choose at least one of those in each regard before you can choose another one or what have you, I think that really helps, and that you can be sitting there looking at it and maybe you don't have the capacity to get this, and this, but you've got the survivable element that you can go out and accomplish at least this much, right? And I do think sappers, and I do, to an extent, the Path to Glory secondary also requires kind of some forward thinking in regards to what you have that's capable of accomplishing that. You couldn't just walk up, and that goes back to, I think it was on your show a couple episodes ago, Paul, in regards of down under pairings, and they were talking about the statistics involved with the old school.
Which I totally disagree with, but
Well, there is a big comfort zone to old school, right? It's what people know. And I know that their statistics, their data shows one aspect of it. But again, that's something that people can fall back on that they're comfortable with, but it might not necessarily always be something that they score on. And so that's something that you go into talking about competitive versus just having a good time playing the game. And you might become, when it comes to secondaries, there's definitely a way to weaponize them as long as you know what you're going into and which format.
Yeah, I think the concept on there, aversion to old school, is if you're defaulting to that, there's probably some aspect of the game you're not taking advantage of, or you're not, or something you failed at in list design or whatever. There's things along the way, and then with the data to back it up, that most people only score 2 or 3 of those points.
Sure.
So
sure.
Yeah,
absolutely.
Goes along. That can't deny that the data. The data just is. It's like feedback. Feedback just is. Let's take a quick break. Then we'll come back, talk a little bit more about this. And I've got an interesting finishing move segment for this podcast. A little bit what I've talked about before, but I want to double down on something I've mentioned in the past.
Cool.
See you in a minute.
Love it.
FTN is brought to you by Discount Games Inc. Please visit them at www.discountgamesinc.com. And don't forget to ask Jay about ways to save even more on your hobby projects.
Hey everybody, we are back. Still got Scary and Red here.
Well, the Webway trip was quick.
So we're talking about the changes in the ITC mission pack, and that we're talking about the stuff that people can do, but I think this may shift a little bit away from Iron Hands, but still right in Marines in the form of White Scars and Raven Guard.
I feel like Marines are just a thing, so you just have to kind of get used to it, wherever you are in the world. This weekend, though, breaking down the biggest tournaments of the weekend, which I do, coming across a couple of tournaments that had Grey Knights at the top and some Tau sprinkled in and even some Dark Angels, which I was very impressed about.
Psychic Awakening, I think, gave the Tau a little bit of a nudge in the right direction. Their way of attacking the midfield of the board is also something that's good for these objectives. I mean, and I'm not saying, I mean, there are going to be things that are just better at doing things, right? But I'm more wanting to build awareness of what you're going to have to tackle.
I think that the way that the like mission format seems to be going as well will also put even more of a strain on terrain in general. I feel like a lot of the disadvantages of say you disagree with the no C's and the deploy go first, just mechanic in general, that does become largely doesn't become as much of an issue if you have very good terrain that you can play on, because being able to pick your deployment zone as well as pick your deployment layout, or your deployment style, Vanguard or Hammer and Anvil or whatever, and then pick the best side for you with good terrain, that really helps mitigate the power of deploy go first.
The concept, the distinction, and you're 100% correct in regards of if real terrain is present on the table, the tactical dilemmas therein of if you make the right decision to position yourself accordingly in order to be able to achieve effects, right? So that's essentially what maneuvering is, right? The real definition, the separation between what movement and maneuver is. Movement is just moving, right? That's just picking up a piece and moving it one place or another. Maneuvering is moving a unit with the intent of achieving a certain effect in your whole tactical plan, right? And if you don't have the terrain to make a difference, then it's just a wash, right? And so I totally agree in regards that terrain can do so much. And I urge all the event organizers and local game stores and whatever else. I understand, everybody's got to start somewhere. Everybody's got to attack that situation from their own foxhole and go with what they got up until they can continue to improve and get better. But I urge everyone out there to continue to improve their terrain situation until you've got what I recommend. I understand the argument for standardized terrain or what have you. I personally prefer very dynamic and engaging terrain from table to table, but I do understand it's just have good terrain, right? Whether it's standardized or not, I cannot emphasize enough. You can't enable players to maneuver if it's just an open field. And at the same time, you can't busy it up too much, but it's just, there is a balance.
It's got to be functional too, right? I mean, there is line of sight block. I know we're, to take us on a bit of a tangent, and I'm going to apologize in advance to the listeners, but functional terrain really matters. And so if you are designing some terrain, you can use tissue boxes. And there's also, you can use whatever you need to function, but it needs to be things that actually have the rules that make armies playable. The stuff has to be something grants cover or blocks line of sight. There's things that it has to do. It can't just exist and not really have a function within the scope of the game.
Well, I'll say, Paul, as for the missions, these missions, the way that they're changing them, it will benefit from the terrain. So it's not as much a tangent as it is like a public service announcement. Being terrain's big. And even something like being able to, if the terrain is not, the terrain can be good, and it can be good on both sides of the table. But if it's not symmetrical, and if it's not exactly the same, it does give us an advantage to the person who gets to pick the table edge that they're going to deploy on.
True. And that again, we go back into the tactical elements and what makes this a war game, right? It's not necessarily supposed to be just a chessboard of the exact same setup across from one another. We have different armies for a reason, and you should have, to an extent, there should be advantages to being able to choose your deployment zone and choose the area in which you want to fight versus where your opponent wants to fight, and making that difference, right? And there's just so much more I could just, you guys will get me all revved up here in a second.
How about them seedless watermelons?
Okay. When you think about how you're setting up your home terrain, when you're inviting just a casual buddy over to play, you make the table sides look approximately similar. There may be one larger wall on one side, but the wall on the other side is not that much different. Again, it all just functions and has a place, has an actual effect on the decisions that would be made during the course of the game. Yeah, we are, and I think most people, we're talking about symmetry. I don't think it's required. I think I'm going to make a blanket statement. I think most people just want to play on terrain that looks good and gives them a cover save to their 30 orcs. That's what.
Yeah, you don't want to line up against your Imperial Guard buddy and just have his 10 Lehman Russes blow you off the table. Like, you want to have a wall to hide behind if he goes first.
Well, because when you think about it, right, like the whole deployment deal is really your first step in maneuvering. And why would a thinking, intelligent army deploy like right into the fire lanes of the opponent, right? Like they would take cover, they would move up and get set. I mean, our whole concept of maneuver largely is based upon like, okay, I move into a position of cover, I then can cover the other element that's going to begin their movement, and they move forward, right? So there's this whole like, sometimes it's simultaneous, sometimes it's subsequent, however, but the whole thing being is that no one would just deploy into an open field where they know they're going to get shot off to a certain extent.
Going second, knowing they got the jump has already gotten on them, you know.
Exactly.
And as for the missions themselves, that's one of the reasons I like the deploy first, go first. As the deploy second, not only do you have the ability to pick like your deployment zone and or re-roll the like style of deployment, but you also get to react to your opponent's deployment. I think that's something that is inherently very, very powerful. Not only is that powerful, but going second in a lot of these missions does give you an inherent advantage. So I think that even without the Cs, like there are going to be a lot of choices that have to go through people's heads. Like, do you want to go first and try and like kill as many things as you can, or do you want to go second and have more control over deployment and mission parameters and things like that? And I think that our thought process will change. However, the game itself will continue to be like a tactical like thought process between two players.
Yeah, I completely agree. I mean, when you think of the defender has effectively in the game, the defender gets the last say, right? I mean, you get to the end of the game, they're the last move, really. Since we don't play like alternating activations or anything, the defending player, round 6, the bottom of the turn, gets to say where ultimately models end up to whatever extent, to a varying degree. But I completely agree in the advantage. So in what we call a correlation of force matrix, I know I'm getting a little too off the rocker on this, but
hit me with that nerd stuff.
I'm telling you, man. So when we look at attacking, or we look at defending, or we look at like a one-on-one meeting engagement, right? So we play a game that is 2,000 points versus 2,000 points. But to a certain extent, when we look at it, so we say that the terms that we want to engage on for an attack is a 3-to-1 ratio, right? So like real world army, we want to essentially fight in the most abstract means with 6,000 points versus your 2,000 points. But we don't always get that choice, right? So then we come in with mitigating factors and things like that. And in this game, those abstractions can be achieved via stratagems or list design and things like that. And so the defender is on the flip side, where a defender should be able to defend from a 1-to-3 ratio, right? So essentially we say that a 2,000 point army should be able to defend against a 6,000 point army. And so that's kind of, I know I just spat out a bunch of numbers and ratios and whatnot, but I'm just emphasizing the point that Scary made in regards that defending and being able to react to what's in front of you, and the attacker has a degree of initiative, but at the same time, there is inherent advantage to having that defender's
But you've engineered that. What you're saying is you've engineered it. Like, you don't have 4,000 extra points to play with. You just got to manufacture a way to endure that.
Correct.
Either by cover or knowing your own stratagems or whatever.
Exactly. You have enablers available to you that you're going to put in place as a defender that you can prepare yourself. You know the attacker is going to come in. So take a game. Scary's going first. He puts his models out there. I can see how he's going to come at me. And as long as you're familiar, right, like knowing your opponent as well as you know yourself, and you feel like you've brought the right tools for the format and the mission and to be able to accomplish your own secondaries as well as knowing how he's going to try to accomplish his secondaries, you now have that advantage of being able to, I've just elaborated on what Scary was
No, but I think you're making a great point there, because as a player, it phones on you to, okay, we're talking, like we've spent the last little bit talking about missions and the way that the new missions will shape the meta and whatnot. You have to understand what secondaries your opponent opponent has taken, what the primary parameters are, and then how they're going to achieve it. And whether they're going first or second, like your tactical choices in game will sort of either will not only try yourself to enable to get your secondaries that you picked, but you know what your opponent's objectives are. Here we're talking about real war. Like in real war, you don't really know exactly what your opponent's objectives are unless you have incredibly good intel. But in this tabletop game, you know exactly that those 2 units are zappers, those 2 units are engineers. That guy's going to be a hero, right? And you can totally use that information to basically stop that in its tracks. So familiarize yourselves with the mission parameters, and we can have a whole other episode on the more esoteric ITC mission format stuff. But in terms of the changes to the missions, I think they allow you to go first and or second and really sort of maximize the points that you can get in game, regardless of the opponent you're playing against, as long as you understand what's going on. And it also helps that you know who's going first or second before you pick your secondaries.
Yeah, absolutely.
That's a good point. That's a very good point. Well, guys, that's been a really nice talk on the missions, and I know we'll talk more as we design list and play into it, and figure out what's gonna want to crack some of these nuts that are out there. But I think the essence of what we were just talking about with terrain and some of the secondaries and the way these are designed is just in an attempt to want everybody to have an equal, fair shot at potentially coming away with a win.
Yeah, I agree.
Agreed.
I think it's an exciting time. We always look forward to the adjustments. LVO is such a good time, and then after that, the adjustments heading into the season. I know the beta period is available for a little bit longer. I'm interested to see the continued development of it.
Yeah, absolutely. Let me take us into the finishing move segment for a minute. Now, I've talked in the past about we're all hobbyists, we all paint stuff, we're all working on stuff. It's just part of the deal, and so I try to find ways of making it a little bit more accessible, sometimes a little bit more affordable. Either by techniques or tricks or whatever, and this is a buying trick. So I've talked in the past about going to your hardware store and getting some of your paint, especially for larger projects like scenery and terrain and stuff, from the hardware store. There is in almost every place that sells paint, gallons of paint, there is an oops section, to where I'm not quite sure how things end up there. Either they mixed up the wrong color, or it wasn't the exact what they thought of off the sample. I don't know how it gets there. But they're heavily discounted. And I'm going to go one step further. If you're painting anything that has a stone texture or a cream texture or a cream color that you need, there will almost 100% be that color of paint in some variation, some slight color one off or the next in the oops section for any type of natural color that you can get extremely discounted. I just got a quart of paint for $2.
Nice.
Yeah, $2. And that will cover the base coat for many, many scenery projects to come. And
that's when you walk up to the table and go, oops.
Well, if I was trying to cover that much, area with GW pots or whatever, that would be a huge investment, right? It's not realistic to want to go through that many pots, to psychologically put yourself going through that many pots of paint for these larger projects.
Now, if they only did that with Agrax Earthshade. Or
I don't know if
Athonian Camo Shade.
A long time ago, found a recipe to make your own Agrax that works really well when you need it in these big mass quantities. I think that there's you can't be the straight out of the pot always works all the time, and when you're working on miniatures, definitely go that route. But for some of these larger what are tables worth of projects, check out that oops paint. You can get, and even if there's not the oops paint there, you can get, I think it's a half quart. I don't know what the ounce. I guess I can look at it because I got one of those also of the sample sizes. A sample size of paint will go a long way.
And so on top of that too, I'm totally with you. I actually am a big fan of the Oops Paint place and where I know exactly where to go at my local hardware store.
Isn't there always a cream color there?
It's something along those lines, right? And sometimes they have really weird, like somebody tried to get something like a metallic paint or something like that done, and sometimes there's some really good, interesting things, especially like what you're talking about for terrain. And that's where I found sometimes people have like finishes, like not necessarily even wood finishes, but like, furniture finishes or whatever.
I saw a varnish over there too.
Yeah. And that's what I'm talking about. So finishes or varnishes that you can use on some of the MDF terrain or what have you that can really help just throw a little bit more to whatever kind of paint scheme that you have or what have, the getting some of this stuff ready as far as terrain goes and those varnishes on top of the Oops Paint, like you can really accomplish a lot for a very affordable value in that regard.
I mean, $2. I mean, that's exactly how much it was. I think the sample size paint that I had mixed to a specific color was $4.
Yeah.
And this is a quantity of paint that's going to last a long time. So if you're going to undertake one of these projects, check it out. I mean, you might not find the color you want, or you might not feel comfortable working with those products. And there's a lot to be said about that too, sticking with what you know. But if you're wanting to branch out and save a couple of bucks, I think that's something you should check out if you weren't already familiar with it.
But also, browns are browns, if you're looking to do a bunch of dirt or something.
And for whatever reason, the nice thing is about a lot of these local hardware stores, or even you venture out to Walmart or what have you. But I'd stick with the local hardware stores on this. If you, for whatever reason, you find one of those Oops paints that you like the color scheme of, you can turn it around and they can actually match that for you easily enough and reproduce it. If for whatever reason you're like, hey, I just want to, I've got a display board that I want to continue with this color. Or
you burn through your lifetime supply of Oops paint and.
Yeah, right.
You need to go back and you didn't know it was called strawberry lilac or something.
Yeah, exactly.
Unless they mess up your batch and then that batch becomes an Oops batch.
That's exactly how it happens.
It's a cycle that folds in on itself.
Yeah.
I'm building this display for Adepticon. Had some breakthroughs with it. I think it's coming along. I finally started putting some color on it, such as this is the topic of the Oops paint. I actually went there under the premise that I would 100% find a base coat for what would be the stone. And sure enough, it was there. I got a highlight color in the sample paint. So I got enough paint to at least get me to the point where I can start going back in with like GW paints and doing some highlights and picking out some of the metallics and that kind of stuff. For no more than $7.
That's awesome. Right. The game is already expensive enough as it is. Anywhere where we can, save a couple of bucks here or there is always a welcome tidbit.
Here's a bonus tip. I got a multi-purpose sponge, and I cut it up to be my brush.
Nice.
So I can, get some texture along where I'm going with it. Cause, the brushes that a lot of us use are, they're small. They're meant for miniatures or whatever. I've got a sponge the size of my fist now that whenever you see pictures of it, like, yeah, it looks like you painted it with a sponge the size of your fist. And it does right now, but I'm going to get there.
I tell you what, again, going back to starting from somewhere, right? Like that, the stuff that you can find at hardware stores or on clearance at like a Michael's or a Hobby Lobby or something like that, like those kinds of things that you can pick up. So you can take those sponges that you're talking about, because those things degrade over time and whatnot. And whether you're using it for big pieces of terrain or you turn them around after you've already used them up to whatever extent, and you can throw, I know this is just random stuff, but not saying I haven't already done this, but you can just throw varnish and it's this hardening material onto a sponge, and it can quickly turn into asteroid rocks or whatever else like that. Oh,
wow, yeah.
And become parts of terrain. Like, trust me, man, I've gone through the whole cycle of taking things that I've used and junking it into more stuff. And, it doesn't have to be just a bunch of, and I'm not saying it's a bad idea. Like, I understand, again, everybody's got to start somewhere, but there are definitely ways to take stuff that you have and totally recycle it into other uses when it seems like it's done.
That's pretty cool. It's one of the core concepts of finishing moves is sometimes like salvages. Taking things and putting in 5 minutes of effort into it that other people were cast off, or that you were previously satisfied with, that 5 more minutes really makes it something transformative. So that's pretty cool.
Yeah, that's pretty neat. And as hobbyists, we all have that bug inside of us
Well, guys, thanks for joining me tonight. You guys have some cool things going on, and I will put those in the show notes so people can check out, what y'all are working on, some other comments or thoughts, and on y'all's shows and channels.
Applications for the U.S. Army Warhammer 40k esports team are still open. Paul, I'll get you that link, so if you don't mind reposting that for the forum, by all means. And understand this is not just, I'm just reiterating from the last time, which I really appreciate, is this is not just for U.S. Army specifically. I know it says U.S. Army on it, but it's a community approach that I'm really taking with this. Yes, the team itself is very much active duty members. For the pro side, we're looking at starting an academy side that's going to help get people into it so that we can cultivate this team for more time to come. But then also the community aspect of it, I'm totally engaged and interested in participating communities of people that, whether you are or not affiliated with the U.S. Army, you can still be part of the U.S. Army esports community, and I'd love to engage with you in the future about it. And so if anybody else is interested out there, by all means reach out to me, Red Powell on Facebook, and the application form is open for everyone that has some interest that would be willing to look at it. So I'll get that to you, Paul. I really appreciate you.
Yeah.
I do a lot of people don't know this, I do a daily Twitch stream on Twitch, 11 a.m. Eastern Standard Time, Monday through Friday, where we sit down and put paint on things. So if you were looking for some hobby inspiration and you just want a nice community of folks to hang out and paint for a couple hours, tune in on a weekday at 11 a.m. Eastern Standard Time and Scardcast on Twitch.
I'll put that in the notes too.
And that's that.
Gentlemen,
Yeah.
thanks again for taking the time out of y'all's evening. I really appreciate your comments on these new missions, and we'll talk again real soon.
Thanks for the invite.
Thanks. Appreciate it.
Good night, everybody.
Good night.
Go ahead, make my day.